The fighting ground smelled of iron and old stone, and I had been standing in the shadow of the broken wall garrison's eastern arch for 3 hours, watching the wrong things. I had come to watch the fighters. That was the official version of why King Aldrich of Velthero had crossed the border ridge under a plain wool riding cloak with no seal and no retinue, and told his garrison liaison that he was a fight scout named Dren, sent by the northern holds to assess potential alliance candidates among the border units. It was a clean lie. It had worked twice before in the western circuits. Border garrisons were proud of their fighters and eager for northern coin. They did not look too hard at the man offering both. I had come to see whether the broken wall unit fought with honor or with brutality, whether their captain, a man named Drevek, was the alliance partner the border council's letters claimed, or the kind of man who would turn that alliance the moment a stronger offer arrived. I had learned long ago that you could read a garrison by the way it treated the fighters who lost. Some units cut the wages of a man who went down. Some made him fight again the same night. Some mocked the healers who came to put him back together, as if a man who needed mending was worth less than the stone he bled on. I had my answer by the second hour. But by the third hour, I had stopped watching Drevek entirely. She was crouched at the far edge of the preparation ring, beside a young fighter who had taken a bad knee to the ribs in the morning bout. He was sitting against the garrison wall with his eyes shut and his breathing shallow, the kind of shallow that meant broken and not bruised, and she had her hands on his sides with that particular stillness, the kind that comes not from doing nothing, but from listening through the palms. I had seen field healers work for 11 years. I had not seen one go that still. She was not a garrison healer. I knew that within the first 10 seconds of watching her, because garrison healers wore the unit's gray sash and she wore nothing of the sort, a plain working coat, travel-worn at the cuffs, a kit bag that had been repaired at the strap more than once. No pack bond on her wrist, no rank seal, just a woman who had apparently walked in off the trade road and begun quietly putting someone back together while the garrison healers stood at the far end of the preparation ring and looked at her the way a wealthy man looks at someone sitting in his chair. Cale lay at my feet. He had been lying there since I arrived, which was unremarkable. My wolf was large and silent and did not trouble himself to pace or growl the way younger wolves did. He had been with me for 15 years since before the crown, and in those 15 years he had developed a stillness that made new soldiers uncomfortable. They thought he was asleep. He was never asleep. He simply chose, very precisely, what to pay attention to. I felt it when his attention shifted. Not dramatically, not the sharp pull I had read about in old bonding accounts, the ones that made it sound like a thunderclap. This was quieter, the way the whole weight of a room changes when someone opens a window in winter. Cale lifted his head. He had been facing the preparation ring, watching the morning bout's final exchanges the way he always watched combat, with the mild professional interest of a soldier who has seen enough fighting to find it categorically unsurprising. Then his head turned, and he was looking at the woman with her hands on the injured fighter's ribs, and something in the quality of his stillness became an entirely different kind of still. I said low, "Cale." He did not look at me. That had never happened. I watched her for another hour before Drevek noticed her. In that hour she finished with the fighter's ribs. She had him breathe in a particular way, 3 times, her palms not pressing but resting, and I could see from the fighter's face the exact moment the pain changed from something sharp to something manageable. And then she moved on without ceremony to a second man who had a shoulder that was sitting wrong in its socket. She did not ask permission. She did not announce herself. She simply moved from one to the next the way water moves to the lowest point, quiet and unhurried, and the fighters let her come. That told me something too. Fighters who have been hurt are not gentle with strangers. They are wary and they are proud, and they do not like to be touched by someone they do not know. The fact that these men let her crouch beside them without the wariness, one of them even shifted his position to make room for her kit bag, meant she was not a stranger to them, or not entirely. She was the kind of person that injured men somehow always recognized, someone who was there for them and nothing else. Cale had not taken his eyes off her. I had been quietly alarmed about this since the first minute. Cale did not watch things. He assessed them and then filed them in whatever section of his enormous wolf mind classified as handled. He had not watched anything the way he was watching her since. I tried to remember and could not. I could not remember Cale watching anything like this. The closest I could come was years ago, when he had sat by the window of my chamber for 3 days while I was ill with the border fever, and even then it had been a different quality, that had been vigilance. This was something else. This was the particular attention a wolf pays to something it already knows. I did not let myself think about what that meant. I had not let myself think about it for 11 years, which was how long I had been king, which was how long I had been telling myself and my counsel that the mate bond was a matter of fate and therefore outside the province of worry, and that if it came it would come, and if it did not come, I was a functioning king with a functioning kingdom and a wolf who was, by any objective standard, the most capable military companion in the northern holds. I did not need a fated mate to govern Velthero. I had managed 11 years without one. Cale turned and looked at me, then he looked back at the woman. I understood wolf language well enough to hear that with perfect clarity. Drevak appeared at the edge of the preparation ring. He was a large man with a garrison captain's bearing, the kind built by 2 decades of watching other men fight rather than fighting himself, broad in the chest, deliberate in the walk, with the settled authority of someone who had never been surprised by anything in his own territory. He was carrying his oversight tablet, and he was flanked by 2 of the ranking garrison healers in their gray sashes, and he was looking at the woman with the traveling kit bag, with an expression that I had seen before on garrison commanders. Not quite anger, not quite contempt, but the particular administrative displeasure of a man whose order has been interrupted by someone who did not know enough to ask permission first. He crossed the ring toward her. She was with a 3rd fighter by then, a young one, 17 at most, who had taken something to the jaw in the 2nd bout and was having trouble tracking movement with his left eye. She had his chin in her hand, and she was moving something, a small point of pressure just below the orbital bone, and the young fighter was blinking with the careful concentration of someone who is being asked to tell the difference between 2 things that feel almost the same. Drevak stopped a foot behind her. Healer. She finished what she was doing, 1 more point of pressure, released before she looked up. That took perhaps 4 seconds. The young fighter blinked twice, and then his left eye focused properly for what I suspected was the first time since the bout. "Who gave you authorization to treat garrison fighters?" Drevak said. "No one," she said. Her voice was even, not apologetic, not defiant either, just even the way a fact is even. "Aldous asked me. He's been having trouble tracking left since the 2nd bout, and I wanted to make sure his orbital wasn't compromised." "Aldous is a garrison fighter. You are not a garrison healer. Where is your rank seal?" "I don't have a garrison seal. I'm not a garrison healer." "Then you have no authorization to treat these men." She sat back on her heels and looked up at him with the same evenness. The ranking healer determined his jaw was bruised but functional. It wasn't. He had a microcompression at the orbital margin. If it goes untreated for another 4 hours, he loses full tracking function in that eye. That's a career injury for a fighter. Drevak looked at the fighter. The fighter, Aldous, looked back with the expression of someone who very much did not want to be in the middle of this conversation, but also very much did not want to lose the use of his left eye. "I'll send garrison healer Bren to reassess," Drevak said. "I've already treated it," she said. "You had no authorization." "I know." She stood, gathered her kit bag and looked at him steadily. "I treated it anyway. You can fine me for practicing without a garrison seal. The fine schedule for unlicensed practice in border units is 80 coin. I have 80 coin." She reached into the kit bag without looking, produced a coin purse, and set it on the preparation bench beside her. That covers the treatment I provided, and 2 additional treatments if your ranking healer determines I've caused harm, which he won't, because I haven't. Is there anything else? The 2 gray-sashed garrison healers behind Drevak looked at each other. Drevak's expression had shifted. It was no longer administrative. It was something colder, and I recognized it. The expression of a powerful man who has been made to look foolish in front of his unit by someone smaller than him, and who has decided that this is a problem requiring more than a fine. "Pack your bag," he said, "and leave the preparation grounds." She picked up the coin purse, returned it to the kit bag, and slung the kit bag over her shoulder. She looked at Aldous. "Avoid contact to that side for 2 days. After that, full function should be restored. If it isn't, find me. I'll be at the Trade Road Inn until morning." Aldous said, "Yes, ma'am." She turned and walked toward the preparation grounds east gate. She walked the way she had crouched, and the way she had moved, and the way she had spoken, with the unhurried, unconcerned steadiness of someone who has been through this particular conversation before, and found it neither surprising nor worth being upset about. Cale stood up. He had not stood up without being told since he was a pup. I said Cale again, sharper this time, and he paused, the way a very large wolf pauses when he is deciding whether to be obedient or whether he has something more important to do. And then he looked at me over his shoulder with an expression I had genuinely never seen on his face. And I was his king and his partner, and I had known him for 15 years, and I could not read it, which frightened me more than anything else that had happened in the preparation ring. Then he sat back down. But he kept watching the east gate long after she had walked through it. I found her at the Trade Road Inn. This required no particular effort. The Broken Wall garrison had exactly one Trade Road Inn. She was sitting at a corner table with her kit bag on the bench beside her, and a bowl of something hot in front of her, and a piece of paper on which she was writing, with the focused efficiency of someone who has had too many things to do for too long, and has developed the habit of doing them in any available moment. I sat across from her without asking. She looked up. She assessed me, the plain wool cloak, the unremarkable boots, the lack of a garrison seal or a merchant's mark, and then she looked back at her paper. "If you need treatment, the innkeep has a back room he lets me use. I'll be done with this in 10 minutes. "I don't need treatment," I said. "Then you can sit there," she said, "but I'm going to keep writing." I sat there. She kept writing. After a moment I said, "What are you writing?" "A report," she said without looking up. "I keep treatment records. Every fighter I treat on the circuit. Date, injury presentation, method, outcome. If they come back with a related problem 6 months later, I have the record." "You treat fighters often?" "I travel the border circuits. The garrison healers are adequate for most things. For specific things, orbital compressions, jaw alignment, certain types of knee damage, there are gaps. I fill them. Without authorization." She looked up at that. Her eyes were gray, a clear, steady gray, the color of sky between storms. She studied me with the same practical attention she had given Drevak, and then she said, "You were watching from the Eastern Arch." "Yes." "You're not a fight scout." It was not a question. I said, "What makes you say that?" "Fight scouts watch the bouts. You watch the preparation ring for most of the day." She returned to her paper. "A fight scout assesses combat capability. You were assessing something else. I don't know what, and it isn't my business." She wrote another line. "Authorization is a garrison construct. It protects the garrison's liability, not the fighter's well-being. I care about the fighter's well-being. I pay the fine when they make me pay the fine, and I keep working." "That's the 4th time you've paid a fine like that." "6th, she said. I sat with that for a moment. "You carry the correct amount with you?" "Always." "Why not simply obtain a garrison seal? It would resolve the problem." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "A garrison seal ties you to a unit. You treat their fighters and only their fighters at times and places the captain approves. The fighters I'm most likely to help are the ones who fall between units, no pack, no bond mark, the ones the garrison healers classify as sufficient for release an hour after a bad bout because they need the preparation ring space back. She paused. I have no pack seal either. We understand each other. I looked at her wrist. She was right, there was no mate mark, no pack bond glyph. Her wrist was bare. In the border circuits, an unmarked wrist was a disadvantage. Without a pack bond, you carried no unit's protection. Every garrison, every trading post, every inn along the road applied a different category of price and accommodation and access to the unbonded, and not one of them was favorable. She worked this circuit alone, with no bond and no seal, and she paid her fines out of a coin purse she kept precisely stocked, and she kept her records on paper, and she moved from fighter to fighter without asking permission, and she had been doing it long enough that the fighters themselves had developed the habit of making room for her kit bag. Cale was outside the inn. I knew this because I could feel him, his direction, his distance, the quality of his attention, the way I had always been able to feel him, the bond between a wolf and his king being the first and oldest bond a ruler learns to read. He was sitting outside the inn's east-facing window. He was not restless. He was not agitated. He was doing the same thing he had been doing all afternoon, which was paying the particular, focused, unhurried attention of a wolf who has found something he intends to stay near. In 11 years, Cale had not sat outside a building for anyone but me. I said, "What is your name?" "Marin," she said. "Do you eat dinner alone at every inn on the circuit?" She looked up at me, and there was something careful and precise in that look, not unfriendly, but careful, the way someone is careful when they are used to their aloneness being encroached upon by people who mean well and don't realize they are doing it. "Usually," she said. "Why?" "Because I have been watching you work since mid-morning," I said, "and I find I am curious about you, and dinner seems like a reasonable way to satisfy a curiosity." She studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "You really are not a fight scout." "No," I agreed. "And you're not going to tell me what you actually are." "Not yet," I said, "not tonight." She considered this. She was not the kind of woman who accepted ambiguity comfortably. I could see her turning the edges of it, checking its integrity the way she checked the integrity of an orbital margin, precise and thorough. But she was also, I suspected, the kind of woman who had long experience with situations that required her to make decisions without complete information, and she had learned to make them cleanly. "All right," she said, and signaled to the innkeep for a second bowl. We ate for 2 hours. I had not sat at a plain wooden table in a trade road inn and eaten dinner with someone for. I searched for the last time and found it was before my father died, which was before the crown, which was 11 years ago, which was long enough that I had stopped noticing the absence and started calling it a preference. I did not particularly enjoy large formal dinners. I told myself this was because I was efficient with my time and large formal dinners were not an efficient use of it, and this was true, but it was not the complete truth, and sitting across from Marin in the corner of the broken wall trade road and I was aware, with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable, of what the rest of the truth was. She was interesting. She was specific, and she was direct, and she had no particular interest in impressing me or managing my opinion of her. And she had opinions about everything. The state of border healthcare administration, the precise mechanical problem with the standard garrison approach to shoulder resets, the economics of traveling unlicensed on the border circuit, the particular category of institutional pride that caused garrison commanders to prioritize their own authority over their fighters' welfare. She talked about all of it the way she wrote her treatment records, clear, ordered, without ornamentation, and with the particular confidence of someone who has spent enough time in the field to know the difference between a theory and a thing she has actually watched happen. I listened. I asked questions. I found that I kept asking questions not because I was working toward any particular conclusion, but simply because her answers were interesting, which was a thing I had not been able to say honestly about a dinner conversation in a very long time. At some point she asked me what I did, and I said I assessed things, which was true, and she accepted this with the same equanimity she brought to everything and asked me what I was currently assessing, and I said the garrison's fitness for alliance, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, and Garrison Captain Drevek is not a man I would ally with, I said. I determined that by the second hour. She was quiet again. Then she said, what made you stay for the third hour? I looked at her. She was looking at her bowl. You, I said. She looked up. We sat with that for a moment, not an uncomfortable moment, but a specific one, the kind with a weight in it. Then she said, I've been on this circuit for 4 years. I don't stay in one garrison town for more than 3 days. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to stay. Then what are you asking? At the moment, I thought about it. Nothing. I'm telling you something true. She looked at me for a long time. Then she returned to her bowl, but she did not tell me to stop. Outside, through the east-facing window, I could feel Kale sitting in the dark, patient and attentive, and absolutely certain about something. She was in the preparation ring at dawn. I had not asked her to be there. I suspected no one had asked her to be there. She had simply arrived, the way she arrived everywhere, quietly and with her kit bag and without asking for permission, and she was working her way along the line of fighters who had drawn the morning bouts before Drevek arrived, and the situation required her to stop. I was in the eastern arch again. This time I had Kale beside me instead of behind me, because I had tried to leave him in the stabling yard and he had come with me anyway, and the look he had given me when I attempted to redirect him a second time was of the variety that reminded me he was an 11-year-old wolf who had been with me since before I had any authority at all, and he did not, in certain circumstances, find that authority entirely persuasive. He stood at my left and watched Marin move through the preparation ring. I watched the garrison. Something had shifted overnight. The fighters who had been uncertain about her yesterday were not uncertain today. Aldous was there, the young one whose eye she had treated, and he was tracking left without any difficulty, and he had clearly told other people about this, because there was a different quality to the way the morning fighters looked at her. Not the wariness of yesterday. Something closer to the way soldiers look at a resource they have correctly identified as valuable and are trying to figure out how to secure. Drevek arrived at the 7th hour. He was not alone. He had brought 3 garrison healers and 2 members of what I recognized as the Broken Wall Border Council, the administrative body that oversaw the garrison's compliance with border territory regulations. They were wearing the council's formal gray and blue sashes, and they had the expressions of people who had been woken early and told there was an administrative problem that required their presence. Drevek crossed the ring with the council members at his shoulders and stopped in front of Marin. She was bandaging a fighter's hand, a specific type of wrap I recognized as a joint stabilization technique, fiddly work that required concentration. Marin, he said. She finished the wrap before she looked up. Pack your bag, he said. You are ordered off the preparation grounds by garrison authority and border council oversight. You have no license certification in this border district. You have no pack registration. You have no treaty standing. Under Border Territory Regulation 14, treatment of ranked unit fighters by an unlicensed and unregistered practitioner is grounds for administrative removal. He paused. Beside him, one of the council members was looking at Marin with the expression of a man who has been handed this particular problem by his captain and is not entirely certain it is the problem the captain has described. You will leave the Broken Wall garrison territory before midday. If you return before obtaining the required certifications, you will be subject to formal censure. Do you understand? Marin looked at him. Then she looked at the border council members. Then she began to pack her bag. "Wait," said the council member beside Drevak. Drevak looked at him. The council member, an older man, silver-haired, with the kind of face that has spent a long time deciding things carefully, was looking at Aldous. Aldous, who was standing at the edge of the ring with his left eye tracking normally. The council member said to Aldous, "Is this the healer who treated you yesterday?" "Yes, sir," Aldous said. "And your orbital function?" "Restored, sir. Garrison healer Bren confirmed it this morning." The council member was quiet for a moment. Then he said to Marin, "What was the nature of the treatment?" "Microcompression at the orbital margin," she said. "Standard presentation after a direct blow to the jaw. If it had been left for 24 hours, scar tissue would have formed over the nerve pathway, and the tracking deficit would have become permanent." "How did you identify it?" "Pressure mapping," she said. "I mapped the orbital rim manually and found the compression point. It takes about 3 minutes if you know what you're looking for." Garrison healer Bren's assessment. Marin was quiet. "He assessed the jaw as bruised but functional," Aldous said. He said it with the flat tone of a soldier who has been told not to editorialize and is not editorializing, merely recounting facts. The council member looked at Drevak. Drevak's expression had not changed. "The regulation," Drevak said, "is clear." "The regulation," the council member said, with the particular patience of an older man who has been disagreeing with garrison captains for longer than this garrison captain has been alive, "is designed to prevent harm to unit fighters. I will note that in this instance the unlicensed treatment appears to have prevented a career-ending injury that the licensed treatment failed to identify." He paused. "I am not rescinding the administrative order. The regulation is what it is. But I would like it recorded in the council log that the reason for her removal is jurisdictional, not clinical." He looked at Marin. "Your work was sound." Marin said, "Thank you." She finished packing her bag. Drevak said, "There is one more matter." He said it with the tone of a man who has been saving something. The preparation ring had gone quiet. The fighters had stopped their warm routines. The garrison healers in their gray sashes were watching. The council members were watching. "She is unmarked," Drevak said. "No pack bond, no mate mark, no treaty standing. She is classified under Border Territory Regulation 7 as an unregistered lone wanderer." He turned to the council members. "Lone wanderers operating in garrison territory without formal registration are subject to restriction of movement orders. I am requesting that the council authorize a restriction order, effective immediately, preventing her from operating on the border circuit pending full registration." The older council member looked at Drevak with an expression that had become substantially less patient. "That regulation is designed for lone wolves who represent a threat to garrison security. She is operating without authorization in garrison facilities," Drevak said, "treating garrison fighters without consent." "The fighters consented," Aldous said. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way young soldiers say things when they have decided they are going to say them regardless of the consequence. Drevak looked at him. Aldous did not look away. The preparation ring was completely silent. Marin stood with her kit bag on her shoulder and looked at Drevak and said nothing, and I had been watching her all morning, and I knew that this particular silence was not submission, and it was not defeat. It was the silence of someone who has been here before, and who has learned that words in this moment do not change outcomes, and who is holding herself together with the particular dignity of someone who will not give the person in front of them the satisfaction of watching her come apart. I had been still for as long as I could manage. Kale made the decision for both of us. He had been standing at my left for an hour. He had been watching her with that quality of attention I had not been able to name and still could not name, and he had been patient about it, patient the way he was patient about everything, complete and untroubled. And then Drevak spoke the words restriction order, and something in Kale's stillness broke. Not loudly, not violently. He simply stood up. He had been sitting, and he walked forward. He walked across the preparation ring. Every fighter in the ring stepped back. Not out of fear. Kale had not growled, had not raised his hackles, had not made a single display of threat. They stepped back the way you step back from something very large that is moving with absolute conviction, because there is no reading the trajectory, and you would rather not find out what happens if you are in the way. Kale walked to Marin. He stopped in front of her. He looked up at her. He was large enough that looking up at a standing human required some adjustment, but he made it. And then, with the measured deliberateness of a wolf who has made a decision and is executing it without ambiguity, he lowered his great silver head and laid it in her hands. The preparation ring did not breathe. Marin looked down at him. Her hands, which had been holding the strap of her kit bag, had come open, the bag hanging from her elbow, and her palms were against the sides of his face, the same resting stillness she brought to every treatment, and Kale's eyes were closed with the complete trust of an animal who is not trusting a stranger, who is trusting someone he already knows. Drevak said something. I did not hear what it was. The mate mark burned to life on my left wrist. It was not a gradual thing. It was not the slow warmth I had read about in the old accounts, the gentle kindling. It was immediate, and it was certain, a searing clarity that went from nothing to absolute in the space of a single heartbeat, and I recognized it the way you recognize your own voice, not because you have heard it before, but because there is nothing in the world it could be except exactly what it is. I looked at my wrist. The mark was silver, the color Kale had always been, with a pattern I had never seen before, not the standard paired crescent of a common mate bond, but something older, a pattern I had seen once in my father's library in a book so old it no longer had a proper spine, a book about the sentinel lunas of the first stage packs, the rare female wolves whose bond marks called to no ordinary king, but to the ruler of the whole bloodline. I looked at Marin. She was looking at her own left wrist. Her mark was silver too. She looked up at me across the preparation ring. 30 feet of stone and silence, and the mark burning on both of us, and Kale's head still in her hands with his eyes closed, and his entire wolf body radiating the particular profound satisfaction of an animal who has been waiting a very long time for something and has finally gotten it. I walked across the preparation ring. I reached up and unclipped the plain wool riding cloak at my shoulder. I let it fall. Under it was the formal riding coat of the King of Velthero, the midnight wool with the silver embroidery at the collar, the house seal at the left breast, the border treaty clasp that every garrison commander on the border circuit was supposed to recognize on sight. The older council member made a sound. I did not look at him. I stopped in front of Marin. She was still looking at her wrist. Kale had lifted his head when I approached, and was now sitting at her left heel with the expression of a wolf who has done something that required doing and does not particularly require acknowledgement. Marin, I said. She looked up at me. Her gray eyes were steady. She was, I realized, not frightened. She was the same as she always was, careful, precise, absorbing information and working out what it meant. The mark was burning on her wrist, and the King of Velthero was standing 3 feet in front of her, and Kale was sitting at her feet, and she was working out what it meant. You were not a fight scout, she said. No. You're the Alpha King. Yes. She looked at the mark. She looked at Kale. She looked at me. Then she said, with the most remarkable steadiness I had ever heard from someone in her position, "Is this what I think it is?" Yes, I said. If you think it is the mate bond, then yes, it is exactly that. She was quiet for a long moment. Behind me, I could hear Drevak trying to determine whether to speak. He did not speak. I didn't know, she said. I had no idea this was. No, I said, neither did I not until this morning. And your wolf. I glanced at Kale. Kale looked back at me with an expression that I now, belatedly, recognized from the previous afternoon. He had known. He had known the moment she walked past the preparation ring's east gate, and he had not told me in any language I could read, because Kale was a wolf and not a courier, and he communicated in the manner he found most effective, which was apparently this. Kale appears to have known, I said. Marin looked down at him. You sat outside the inn window last night, she said to him. It was not a question. I thought it was a garrison patrol wolf. Kale made the sound that, in his vocabulary, meant that was beneath his dignity to address, which was a low, rumbling breath through his nose. Marin made a sound that I had not heard from her before. It took me a moment to recognize it as a small, compressed, involuntary laugh. It did something to me that I did not have words for. I turned to face the preparation ring. Every fighter was there. The garrison healers were there. The 2 border council members were there. Drevak was there, and he was the color of old ash, and his administrative certainty had left him and not yet been replaced by anything. I said at full carrying volume, the way you speak when you are addressing a room of soldiers who need to hear something clearly. I am Aldrich, King of Velthero. I came to this garrison to assess the fitness of its command for a northern alliance. I made my assessment before midday yesterday. I let that settle. The woman beside me is Marin. She is unmarked, as you have observed. She is unbonded, unlicensed in this district, and has been operating on the border circuit for 4 years without a garrison seal. She has also, in the past 24 hours, restored full orbital function to one of your fighters who would otherwise have lost it permanently, corrected 3 other injuries that your licensed healers cleared as sufficient, and declined to leave this garrison's preparation ring until she was formally removed by 2 council members and a restriction order. I paused. She is also my fated mate. The mate bond is active on both wrists. My wolf Kale, who has been with me for 15 years and has approached exactly no one in that time without my direct instruction, initiated the bond reveal himself. I looked at Drevak. I will be documenting what I observed here in my alliance report. The administrative removal of a healer whose work prevented a career-ending injury, executed in a manner designed to humiliate rather than regulate, that will be in the report. The request for a restriction order, which is a garrison security measure being deployed as a personal reprisal, that will also be in the report. Drevak said, My lord. I am not finished, I said. He stopped. I came here to determine whether Captain Drevak is a man who protects those under his care, or a man who protects his own authority at the expense of those under his care. I have my answer, and it is not the one the Border Council's letters indicated it would be. I looked at the older council member. The council's assessment of the Broken Wall Unit's command fitness may require revision. The older council member said, with the air of a man who has suspected something for some time and is relieved to have it confirmed, It may, my lord. I turned back to Marin. She was watching me with that same careful, precise attention. The mark was still burning on her wrist. I could feel mine, a warmth that had not faded and would not fade, the bond settling into permanence the way a foundation settles into ground. I was aware that I had just declared her my fated mate in front of 30 soldiers and 2 council members and an administrative captain, and I had not asked her what she wanted, which was, now that the declaration was made and the ring was silent, the only thing that mattered. Marin, I said, quiet now just for her. She looked at me. The bond is what it is, I said. It is fated and it is real, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But you have been alone on this circuit for 4 years, and you have made your own choices about what you need, and I am not going to tell you what comes next. I paused. I am asking, not commanding, asking. She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at Kale, who was still sitting at her left heel with his eyes half closed, and his enormous silver body radiating the warmth of a wolf, who is exactly where he means to be. Then she looked at her wrist, at the silver mark that was the pattern from my father's old book, the Sentinel Luna mark, the mark that had not appeared on a woman's wrist in 3 centuries. "I treated 6 fighters this morning," she said. "I know, I watched. The young one, Aldous, is going to need a follow-up in 10 days. The compression site needs to be checked for secondary scar tissue. I'll arrange for him to be seen. I have a treatment record for every fighter I've worked with on this circuit. 4 years of records. I'd want to keep doing it." "There are fighters in Velthero who need treating," I said. "The northern holds have a garrison circuit twice the length of this one. You could work it without a garrison seal because you'd have the crown standing. No fines." Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile, but in the vicinity. "No fines," she said. "No restriction orders," I said. "No administrative removal. And Cale would have somewhere to sit that isn't outside an inn window." She looked down at him. He looked back up at her with the patient certainty of a wolf who has already made all the necessary decisions and is simply waiting for the humans to catch up. "He's been doing that all day," she said, "sitting where I am." "He has been doing it since he first saw you," I said. "Yesterday afternoon in the preparation ring, he stood up without being told. That has never happened." She was quiet again, the particular quiet I had learned in one evening, and one morning was the sound of her thinking, not uncertain thinking, but thorough thinking, the kind that works through a problem completely before it commits. Then she said, "I'm not a court woman. I don't know how to be one. I'm not asking you to be one. I have opinions about Garrison Healthcare Administration. I have noticed. I'm going to keep having them." "Good," I said. "Someone should." She looked at me. The gray eyes, storm sky gray, the color between what has been and what is coming, were steady and clear, and she was looking at me the way she had looked at everything all morning, with the full weight of her attention, which I was learning was not a light thing to be under. "All right," she said. It was the same phrase she had used last night, when I asked to stay for dinner. It carried the same quality, not surrender, not impulsive agreement, but a decision made by someone who has thought about it and found it sound. I held out my hand, the one with the mark on the wrist, the silver line still warm and alive against my skin. She looked at it. Then she put her hand in mine, small, precise, with the careful steadiness of hands that know how to hold broken things gently, and the mark on both our wrists flared once, silver bright, the bond completing itself in the way the old accounts described. Not loudly, not violently, but with the absolute certainty of something that was always going to happen. Cale stood up finally and pressed his great silver head against both our joined hands simultaneously, which was not a thing I had ever seen him do, and which was, I realized, the wolf equivalent of a declaration, his declaration, the one he had apparently been trying to make since yesterday afternoon in the preparation ring. Behind us, the older council member said quietly to no one in particular, "Well, that settles the alliance question." The ride back to the border ridge took half a day. Marin rode beside me on the gray garrison horse. The border council had provided when it became apparent that the wandering healer the king of Velthero had just claimed as his fated mate could not make the journey to the northern holds on foot. She rode like someone who has ridden a great deal in circumstances where the horse was not entirely suited to her, and has simply adapted to this reality. She rode, in other words, the way she did everything, with the quiet, practical steadiness of someone who works with what they have, and does not particularly resent the limitations. Cale ran at her left stirrup. He had not run beside anyone but me in 11 years. He ran at her left stirrup with the easy, loping stride of a wolf who has been given permission to do something he has wanted to do for some time and is not wasting the opportunity. I watched him, and I thought about what I had not let myself think about for 11 years. I had told myself the mate bond was a matter of fate, and therefore outside the province of worry. This was true. I had told myself that if it came, it would come, and if it did not come, I was a functioning king with a functioning kingdom. This was also true. What I had not told myself, what I had been careful not to tell myself, with the thoroughness of a man who has decided that a thing he cannot control is better not examined too closely, was how the absence had felt. I looked at Marin, riding at my left in the morning light, with her kit bag strapped to the garrison horse's saddle, and her treatment records folded carefully inside it and her mark silver bright on her wrist, and I thought, 11 years. She had been somewhere for 11 years, moving through garrison towns and trade road inns and border circuits, treating fighters who fell between units, and paying her fines from a coin purse kept precisely stocked, and I had been in Velthero ruling alone, and telling myself the absence was a preference. She caught me looking. She looked back with that steady, practical regard. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "I was thinking." "About what?" I considered how to say it. Then I said, "About the fact that you have been on this circuit for 4 years, and the fact that my wolf has apparently been aware of you since before yesterday, and the fact that I spent 11 years telling myself I was content with the absence of this." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Were you content?" "I was functional," I said. She made a sound, not quite the laugh from the preparation ring, but in the same family. "Functional is not the same thing," she said. "No," I said, "it isn't." We rode in silence for a while. The border ridge came into view ahead, the granite line where Velthero's holds began, the place where the stone changed from the flat gray of the border districts to the darker, older gray of the Northern Territory. Home. My home for 11 years, and now, I supposed, hers. Marin was looking at the ridge. I watched her assess it the way she assessed everything, with the particular attention of someone taking in something new and working out what it would require of her. "Your fighters," she said. "Yes." "How many in the northern hold units?" "The primary garrison at Velthero Hold has 240 active fighters. The 3 border circuit garrisons between here and the hold have perhaps another 100 between them." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The orbital compression presentation, the one that Bren missed, it's common in fighters who work the jaw specifically. High-volume competition circuit, certain striking styles. Your northern hold fighters, are they?" "Yes," I said. "The Velthero style favors jaw strikes." She made the sound of someone who has identified a problem they intend to solve. "I'll need the garrison healer's assessment protocols," she said, "to see where the gaps are. I'll arrange it. And the treatment records from the past 2 years, if I can cross-reference the presentation patterns." "Marin." She looked at me. "You don't have to earn your place," I said. "It isn't a position you are applying for. The bond is real. You are my fated mate. You don't need to demonstrate your usefulness." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I know that. I'm not doing it to earn anything." She looked back at the ridge. "I'm doing it because there are fighters with orbital compressions being cleared as sufficient by healers who don't know how to look for them, and that is going to keep happening until someone fixes the protocols." She paused. "That happens to be something I can fix. So I'm going to fix it." I looked at her. At the mark on her wrist, silver in the morning light. At Cale running at her stirrup, his great silver coat the same shade as the mark, as if the bond had always intended to be this color and had simply been waiting for her. I said my father had a book. She looked at me. "An old book," I said, "from the first stage records. It described a bloodline rare," he said, "rarer than rare. A woman whose wolf form had not appeared in the recorded history of the northern holds for 3 centuries. A sentinel Luna." He described the mark. I looked at her wrist. "That mark." She was quiet. I read it when I was young, I said. Before the crown, my father thought it was a curiosity, a historical footnote. I paused. He thought the bloodline was extinct. I didn't know about any bloodline, she said. I have no family on record who were anything other than ordinary unaffiliated wolves. I've never shifted. I assumed. She stopped. You assumed there was nothing there to shift, I said. I've been unbonded, she said. The wolf form doesn't emerge without the bond for some bloodlines. I thought mine was simply absent. We rode in silence for a moment. When the bond completes, I said carefully, the form sometimes emerges. I don't know if it will. The book was old and the records were incomplete, but I wanted you to know what I know. She looked at her wrist, at the mark, at Kale running steady and certain at her stirrup. A sentinel Luna, she said, as if trying the shape of it. The book described it as a wolf made for the holding together of things, I said. Not the fighting forward of things. The holding together. I paused. The book said the sentinel Luna's gift was the same as her bearing, the capacity to be steady in the middle of something breaking, and to know exactly where to put her hands. Marin was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, the first stage records are in Velthero Hold. In my father's library, I said, in the East Tower. She nodded once, the kind of nod that is a decision. I'll want to read them, she said. I expected nothing less, I said. We arrived at Velthero Hold at evening. I had sent a rider ahead from the border ridge, which meant the hold was not unprepared. The gates were open, the senior staff were present, and the garrison that lined the approach road was standing at attention in the manner that indicated they had been told something significant was happening, and were doing their best to communicate readiness without knowing quite what to be ready for. Marin rode in beside me without flinching. I had not expected her to flinch, but I had thought the scale of it, the old granite walls, the towers, the assembled garrison, the senior council members at the entrance stairs, might give her a moment's hesitation. It did not. She rode in with the same practical, assessing attention she brought to preparation rings and trade road inns, and she looked at the hold the way she had looked at the border ridge, as something to be understood, not something to be overwhelmed by. Kale entered at her left stirrup. Every wolf in the garrison watched him. A wolf who follows his bonded king does not draw unusual attention. A wolf who runs at the left stirrup of a stranger, who, on arrival at the gates, positions himself between that stranger and the assembled garrison without being asked, with his great silver head slightly raised and his shoulders level, in the posture that in wolf language says this one is mine and I am here, draws the attention of every wolf in the vicinity immediately and holds it. The garrison wolves went still. Not the stillness of threat, the stillness of recognition, of 100 wolves who have been living alongside their king's wolf for years, who know his movements and his moods and his habits, looking at something his wolf is doing and understanding what it means with the wordless certainty of animals whose language is older than any word. My head of household, Wren, was at the top of the entrance stairs. She had served my father before she served me. She had gray in her hair and the particular efficient composure of someone who has managed a king's household through multiple crises without anyone outside the building noticing there were any crises. She looked at Marin. She looked at Kale. She looked at the mark on Marin's wrist. She turned to the household staff behind her and said, with the brisk calm of a woman who has simply reclassified an unusual situation into the category of things requiring management, prepare the Queen's chambers, add the East Tower Library access to the standing permissions, and someone send word to the Northern Border Council. The King is back and there will be business in the morning. Marin had dismounted by then. She was standing in the courtyard with her kit bag and looking at the hold's East Tower, where the library was, with an expression I recognized by now. She was planning. I came to stand beside her. The library opens at dawn, I said. "I can read by candlelight," she said. "You have been traveling since yesterday morning," I said. "The treatment records from the past 2 years." "We'll be there in the morning," I said. "They have been there for 2 years. They will continue to be there." I paused. "The East Tower Library will keep until dawn, Marin." She looked at me. Then she looked at the hold, the warm-lit windows, the evening stone, the garrison wolves settling from their heightened attention back into the ordinary rhythms of an evening watch. Cale had positioned himself at her left heel again, which he appeared to have decided was his preferred location. "All right," she said, third time. I recognized what it meant by now. Not surrender, not impulsive agreement. A decision made by someone who has thought about it and found it sound. The mark on my wrist did not fade. It had been 2 years now, and it had not faded, which was unremarkable. The mate bond mark, once set, does not fade. But I found myself aware of it in the way I had been aware of my crown for the first months after my father died, which was to say with a constant, particular consciousness of something real and weighty and entirely mine. Not a burden, a fact about the shape of my life. Marin had fixed the garrison healer protocols within 3 months. She had done it by writing a detailed assessment of the gaps in the standard border circuit approach to jaw and orbital injuries, and presenting it, without ceremony, to the hold's medical council. The medical council had accepted the assessment and implemented the revised protocols. 6 months later, the border circuit healers were identifying orbital compressions at a rate that had measurably reduced permanent tracking deficits in the border units. Marin kept the records. She continued to work the circuit. She did not have a garrison seal. She had the crown standing, which was better, and she had Cale running at her stirrup when she went, which had resolved the question of lone wanderer status permanently. The fighters on the circuit had updated their understanding of the situation with the practical efficiency of soldiers who have learned that the woman with the kit bag now has a very large king's wolf at her heel and a mate mark that matches the king's, and that this is simply the current shape of the world and they should adjust accordingly. She slept in my chamber and kept her treatment records in the East Tower Library and had opinions loudly at the hold's quarterly administrative council, and was deeply and thoroughly right about most of them. She had shifted in the end. 3 weeks after we arrived at the hold, in the courtyard at midnight, with Cale sitting at her heel and both our marks warm and the bond fully settled, and the northern sky overhead the particular dark of a moonlit clear night, she had shifted, for the first time in her life, into the pale silver form of the sentinel Luna. I had read about it in my father's book. The book did not prepare me for seeing it. She was large, was the first word, larger than any wolf I had seen outside of Cale, which was unexpected because she was not a large woman. She was the silver of the mark of Cale's coat, of the moon on the northern stone, and she held herself with the same steadiness. She always held herself with completely still in the middle of something enormous, knowing exactly where to put her weight. Cale had made a sound I had never heard him make. A low, sustained note that was not quite a howl and not quite a call, something older than either, something that came from the same place in his chest where 11 years of waiting had lived. Marin had looked at him, then she had looked at me. And the hold's wolves had begun to howl. 1, then 3, then the whole night garrison, not in alarm, not in challenge, in the way wolves howl when something has come home that they have been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. I had stood in the courtyard in the midnight cold and listened to my whole hold sing for my fated mate, and I had thought, I told myself for 11 years that the absence was a preference, that I was functional, that the mate bond was outside the province of worry. I had been wrong about all of it. But she had been out there on the circuit in the trade road inns, in the preparation rings they barred her from being exactly herself, precise and steady and unfrightened and putting things back together with careful, unhurried hands, not waiting for me, not waiting for anyone, simply being who she was entirely without asking permission. I had not deserved her particular morning. I had not deserved to be the person Kale chose to walk across a preparation ring for. I was a king, and I had a hold and a garrison and a history, and none of it had produced in 11 years what one morning in the broken wall preparation ring had produced, which was the simple, specific clarity of a bond that was not a surprise to anyone except the two people it landed on. This is what I have thought about in the 2 years since. That fate is not a thing that announces itself. It does not send word ahead. It does not wait for a convenient moment or a sufficient ceremony or an administrative authorization. It arrives the way she arrived, quietly, with a kit bag and a coin purse kept precisely stocked, and no particular interest in whether anyone in the room is going to permit it. And the only question, when it arrives, is whether you are the kind of person who steps forward. I am grateful every morning that I was. I am grateful for Kale, who has never in his life waited for my permission to do something that clearly needed doing. I am grateful for the older border council member, who wrote in his log that her removal was jurisdictional and not clinical, because it was the true thing, and he said it. I am grateful for Aldous, who said the fighters consented in a flat voice into the silence of a preparation ring, when he was 17 years old and did not have to say anything at all. And I am grateful, most of all, for Marin, who walked out of the broken wall preparation grounds east gate with her kit bag on her shoulder and her coin purse in her bag and her unmarked wrist, and no particular distress about any of it, and who came back the next morning anyway, because there were fighters who needed treating and she was the one who knew how. She is in the East Tower Library now. She has been there since dawn. She will be there past nightfall, and I will bring her something hot, and she will finish the paragraph she is reading before she looks up, and Kale will be lying at her feet with his great silver head on her knee, which is where he has spent most of the past 2 years. He knew before I did. He has never once let me forget it. I do not mind. Some days I think the whole of this, the bond, the mark, the life we have built in the hold above the northern ridge, comes down to one morning in a border preparation ring. A woman who would not leave until they made her, and a wolf who got up without being told. The rest of it was always going to follow.